The first 10 minutes of Broken Vows, the goddess casts you down, feel like someone smiling at you while they are quietly pocketing your wallet. It's warm, romantic, almost embarrassingly sincere, and then you start noticing the camera lingering a bit too long on a handshake, a champagne toast that doesn't reach the eyes, a promise that lands with a little too much emphasis, like it's being said for the record. And if you've watched enough betrayal dramas, your stomach starts doing that thing where it's like, oh no. Oh no, don't do it. Don't trust him. But the show's trick is that it makes you want to trust him anyway, because it makes you believe she trusts him with her whole life. And yeah, I'm talking about it here on Bongo Gaming, because this one absolutely wormed its way into my week. If you enjoy these long, messy, feelings-forward reviews, subscribe real quick so you don't have to hunt me down later. I'm going to do this with moderate spoilers, like, I'll talk about the big turning points you can already feel coming, but I'm not going to stomp all over whatever endgame surprises the final stretch is holding. The premise is simple in the way a loaded gun is simple. You've got a female lead who's framed as devotion embodied, capable, wealthy, hidden in plain sight, powerful, the kind of person the world calls lucky because it can't handle admitting she's just competent and relentless. The show leans into this symbolic goddess idea, not in a literal mythology sense, but in a social one. She's the kind of woman people build their fantasies around and then punish when she refuses to play the role they wrote for her. She gives her heart to one man, makes vows, real vows, the kind that are supposed to mean something, and the relationship is shown as this private little universe where tenderness is currency. Then the betrayal hits, and it hits in that specific way betrayal always does in dramas like this. It's not just emotional cheating or a sudden breakup. It's humiliation. It's the person you love recruiting other people to help erase you. What got me is how the drama doesn't rush to the revenge queen pose right away. It lingers in the ache. Not in a voyeuristic, let's punish her for having feelings kind of way, more like it wants you to sit in the disorientation with her. That moment after the vows are broken where the world still looks the same, the lighting is still pretty, the music is still trying to be romantic, and yet your brain is screaming because nothing is safe anymore. If you've ever had the experience of realizing someone you trusted has been curating a version of reality for you, you know the exact emotional flavor I'm talking about. It's cold. It's embarrassing. It makes you want to rewind your own life and examine every sentence for hidden knives. And here's where the show starts playing with power as a performance, which is one of the reasons I ended up loving it. Because a lot of scorned woman returns stories skip the most interesting step, the part where she has to decide what version of herself survives. This drama does that deciding on screen. Not with a speech, not with a glow-up montage that magically fixes trauma, but with those small, brutal beats where she's forced to watch people treat her love like stupidity. The husband or fiancé, keeping it general because the story's presented more as an archetype than a name trivia fact, doesn't just leave. He breaks her socially. He makes sure there are witnesses. There's greed in it, status hunger, the stink of people who think affection is a weakness they can exploit. Let me paint one of the show's most vivid emotional images without pretending I can quote the exact blocking like a production diary. There's a sequence early on, call it the betrayal reveal sequence, where everything is clean and glossy on the surface. You've got this polished environment, expensive taste coded into every corner, and she walks into it expecting to be safe. And the camera treats her like the center of gravity at first, soft focus, warmer tones, her face given space. Then, as the betrayal becomes undeniable, the visual language changes. The background gets louder. People become shapes leaning in. The sound seems to narrow, like your ears do when you're in shock. And her expression does this devastating thing where it tries to keep dignity intact while the eyes betray it. That's the moment I knew the show understood humiliation as an experience, not a plot device. It's not just, she is sad. It's, she is being watched while she bleeds. That's also where the performances start earning their paycheck. The female lead has to play a very delicate contradiction. She's not naive, she's not weak, but she did believe in vows. And the actor sells that difference. You can see her intelligence in the way she takes in information quickly, even while her heart is breaking. She doesn't look confused because she's dumb, she looks confused because she can't make the math work. The numbers don't add up. And there's something so human about that, this idea that betrayal isn't shocking because it's unimaginable in the abstract, it's shocking because it's unimaginable from the person you assigned, safe, to. Now, if you're someone who gets impatient with the suffering arc in these kinds of dramas, I hear you. I'm usually the same. I'm not here for extended punishment theater. But I'm going to give you a slightly contrarian take. I actually think the early humiliation in Broken Vows is doing structural work, not just emotional indulgence. Because when the comeback happens, it doesn't feel like the writers flipping a switch. It feels like a reaction to a specific kind of cruelty. The drama is basically saying, you don't get a goddess until you create a world that refuses to treat her like a person. And that is dark, but it's coherent. There's a scene rhythm to this show that I found surprisingly addictive. The early half has these long, almost suffocating stretches where the camera lets a moment sit. A glance is allowed to become a bruise. A silence becomes a threat. And then, when the plot needs to yank you forward, it snaps. The editing turns crisp. Conversations get shorter. The cuts get sharper. You can feel the show transitioning from romance memory into war planning, and it's not subtle, but it doesn't need to be. This is melodrama with a spine, and it's proud of it. I also want to talk about how the goddess framing changes the entire moral temperature of the story. Because on paper, revenge stories can feel like junk food. Fun, sure, but empty. Here, revenge is treated like an identity reclamation project. It's not just, I'll destroy you because you hurt me. It's, I'll destroy the system of lies that allowed you to hurt me and then smile about it. The betrayers don't simply cheat. They take. They strip. They rewrite narratives. And when she returns, it's not just to get even, it's to reassert reality. That's the part that made me lean in closer, because the show quietly understands that betrayal is also a theft of story. When someone breaks vows for greed or status, they are often trying to change the past retroactively. You weren't important. You didn't matter. You were a stepping stone. The female lead's comeback is, in a way, a refusal to let them narrate her life. And if that sounds heavy, don't worry, the show still delivers the petty satisfactions too. It knows you want to watch powerful people sweat. There's this delicious shift in the way she holds her body once she stops begging to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. Her posture changes. Her face becomes calmer, not because she's healed, but because she's decided something. And I love that the show doesn't mistake numbness for strength. It shows strength as focus. Not loudness. Not cruelty for sport. Focus. The kind of focus that makes everyone else in the room realize they've underestimated you for way too long. And can we talk about how the drama uses wealth and status as a kind of costume design? Because the production clearly knows what it's doing. Early on, the visuals around her devotion feel softer. Even when she's in expensive settings, the palette leans warm, romantic, inviting, like money is just comfort and love is the main luxury. After the betrayal, the same kinds of spaces feel colder. Harder lines. More reflective surfaces. Glass, marble, metal. It's like the world turns into a mirror designed to show you who's watching. Costuming follows that emotional logic too. I'm not going to pretend I can catalog outfits like a fashion channel, but you can feel the intent. She stops dressing for tenderness and starts dressing for consequence. Here's a question that kept pulling me forward while I watched. What does this story think power is? Is power just money? Is it public image? Is it legal leverage? Is it the ability to ruin someone with a phone call? The show toys with all of that. But the most interesting answer it flirts with is that power is the ability to remain internally unmoved while externally decisive. The betrayers thrive on making her react. They want her messy, desperate, pleading, because that keeps them in control. When she stops giving them the reaction they can feed on, they start starving. Now, I'm going to be careful here because we're staying within moderate spoilers, but the comeback portion isn't one single, tardier, moment. It's incremental, and that's why it works. The drama doesn't just hand her a cape. It shows her choosing herself over and over again. The first choice is emotional, she stops romanticizing the man who broke vows. The second is social, she stops caring if people think she's too much for fighting back. And the third is strategic, she starts aiming her power at the structures the betrayers relied on, reputation, business ties, alliances, whatever their version of stability is. One thing I appreciated is that the show seems aware of the fantasy it's selling, and it doesn't insult you about it. It knows you're here for the catharsis. It knows you want that moment where the man who discarded her is reduced to begging. But it also wants you to feel the cost. Not in a preachy way. More like a quiet, persistent undertone. If you become the person capable of casting down enemies, you are also stepping into a colder world. The drama doesn't frame that as tragedy exactly, but it doesn't treat it as free either. And I'll be real with you for a second, I have a complicated relationship with betrayal plots. I've seen too many shows turn cheating or greed into a cheap shock, like it's a button you press to make an audience angry. And maybe this is personal, but I've been the person who trusted someone's words because I wanted the world to be that simple. Not a marriage vow situation for me, but enough to recognize that specific shame of thinking, how did I not see it? So when a drama handles that emotional aftermath with even a little respect, it hits me harder than I expect. I found myself pausing this show not because I was bored, but because I needed a second to unclench my jaw. And yes, I also paused to get snacks like a gremlin, because emotional devastation pairs nicely with whatever's in your pantry, apparently. What's clever about Broken Vows is how it invites you to enjoy the revenge while also making you examine why it's satisfying. There's a social commentary pulse underneath all the glossy melodrama. People love a goddess as long as she stays benevolent. As long as she gives and gives and forgives and smiles. The second she starts collecting debts, the same people who benefited from her softness label her cold, crazy, vindictive, too proud. The show uses that hypocrisy like a weapon. You can feel it in the way side characters, accomplices, opportunists, whoever's orbiting the betrayer, suddenly scramble to redefine her as the villain the moment she stops being useful. And the male lead, the betrayer, this is where I'm going to be both honest and fair. The writing could have made him a cartoon. Mustache twirling, one note, evil for the sake of evil. It flirts with that archetype because the genre likes its villains clean. But the performance, at least in the way it's framed, seems to aim for something more recognizable, entitlement. Not, I hate her, but I deserve more. Not, I'm a monster, but I'm practical. That's a chilling kind of villainy because it's the one people excuse in real life. It's the guy who thinks vows are valid only when they are convenient. The show makes you hate him, but it also makes you recognize him, and I think that's why the anger feels so alive. There's also a surprisingly effective use of sound design. When the drama wants you to feel romance, it doesn't just toss in sweeping music. It lets quiet exist. Breath. Fabric movement. The little domestic sounds that make intimacy feel real. And when the betrayal hits, those sounds get replaced by harsher textures, heels on hard floors, doors closing with a finality that feels like judgment, the faint hum of a crowd when she's being socially cornered. The score, from what I could tell, uses recurring motifs in a way that's almost mean. A romantic theme might echo later in a colder form, like the show is reminding you that the love was real even if the man wasn't. Pacing-wise, I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. There are stretches where the drama seems to enjoy its own suffering a little too much, where you're like, okay, I get it, the humiliation is thorough. But even in those moments, the visual storytelling tends to keep it watchable. The camera will find small rebellions in her face. A tightened jaw. A blink that holds back tears not because she's weak, but because she refuses to give them the satisfaction. Those details matter. They keep you connected to her as a person, not just a revenge vehicle. And then the tone starts shifting in a way I found genuinely thrilling. You can feel the story turning from, please love me, to, you should have feared me. It's not just that she discovers her true identity, in a plot sense, it's that she stops hiding her competence. The show frames it like she's been living with her power muted for the sake of peace, for the sake of the relationship, because she thought love meant making herself smaller. When that illusion dies, what comes back is not just a richer, more influential version of her. It's the version of her that never should have had to apologize for being formidable. There's a moment, again, I'm keeping it impressionistic, that feels like the hinge of the whole drama. It's when she realizes pleading won't work because the betrayer isn't misunderstanding her, is understanding her perfectly and exploiting it. You see her stop arguing facts. Stop trying to prove loyalty. Stop trying to remind him of vows like they're a magic spell. And instead, she starts asking different questions. Questions like, who benefits if I stay broken? Who profits from me being quiet? Who gets to rewrite the story if I disappear? That pivot is where the goddess stops being a nickname and becomes a threat. And I need you to understand, the comeback isn't framed as her suddenly becoming cruel. It's framed as her becoming accurate. That's the best word for it. Accurate. The drama is obsessed with accuracy. Seeing people as they are. Reading rooms correctly. Understanding what power actually moves. It's like once the romantic fog is burned off, everything is sharper. Colors are sharper. Dialogue is sharper. Even the pauses become sharper, because now the pauses aren't uncertainty, they are calculation. Here's another thing that kept surprising me, the show's relationship with mercy. Because you'd think a story called The Goddess Casts You Down is going to be nothing but punishment porn, right? But it keeps raising this uncomfortable idea that mercy can be a form of power too, and that sometimes the most humiliating thing you can do to a betrayer is not to scream, not to beg, not to rage, but to look at him like he's small. Like he's a bad investment you're cutting off. That kind of emotional withdrawal is so much harsher than a slap. And when the show leans into that, it becomes less of a soap opera and more of a psychological execution. The drama also understands that revenge isn't satisfying if it's just her being cool. It has to be specific. It has to target what they value. The betrayers value status, image, resources, social standing, the ability to walk into rooms and be treated like kings. So her strategy, at least as the story presents it, feels designed to dismantle those exact pillars. It's not random cruelty. It's demolition. And the show, to its credit, makes the demolition feel earned rather than magical. Even when it's heightened, it's emotionally logical. If you're a newcomer to this genre, here's what you should expect emotionally. You're going to be angry early. Like, talk to your screen angry. You're going to want her to wake up faster, to stop loving him faster, to stop giving chances. And the show is going to test your patience on purpose, because it wants the eventual shift to feel like a release of pressure that's been building for hours. If you can ride that wave, the payoff isn't just, she wins. The payoff is watching a person reclaim her own narrative in front of the very people who try to erase it. And just when you think you know the exact flavor of story this is going to be, it starts doing this interesting thing with the idea of identity. The hidden status angle, whether that's wealth, influence, connections, competence, some combination, doesn't just function as a plot trump card. It becomes part of the theme. Because it raises the question, did they love her, or did they love the version of her they thought they could control? And if her power was always there, why did she hide it? Was it humility? Was it trust? Or was it, in its own way, fear of what happens when you're fully seen? The more I sat with it, the more I realized the show is quietly criticizing a particular kind of relationship fantasy. The fantasy where a powerful woman softens for a man, and that softness is treated like proof of love. Broken Vows flips that fantasy into a warning. It's like the drama is saying, if someone only values you when you're smaller, they don't value you. They value their access to you. And that's the kind of line that sneaks up on you, because you came here for drama and suddenly you're getting life advice you didn't ask for. There's also something addictive about watching the betrayers miscalculate her. That's one of the most satisfying engines in any revenge story, the villains thinking they've already won. In this drama, their arrogance feels grounded in something ugly but real. They mistake love for weakness. They confuse kindness with gullibility. They interpret her devotion as a leash they can yank. And the show lets them believe that for long enough that when the ground starts shifting under them, it's not just surprising, it's embarrassing for them. The kind of embarrassment that makes powerful people lash out, which only exposes them more. You can feel the narrative tightening around that idea as the comeback begins to take shape. The drama starts planting little signals that she's done being acted upon. The camera stops framing her as someone waiting for decisions to be made about her. It starts framing her as the person making the decisions. Even simple staging choices, who's centered, who's in the foreground, who gets the last look before a cut, become part of the power shift. It's the kind of visual grammar you might not consciously notice while you're watching, but you feel it. Your body feels it. Suddenly you're sitting up instead of slumping. And the chemistry dynamics change too, which is important because the show is basically built on relationship electricity. Early chemistry is soft and intimate, built on trust, on shared language, on the little rituals that make a couple feel real. Post-betrayal chemistry becomes something else: threat, tension. The "we know each other too well" kind of stare down where every word is a weapon. And honestly, that's where this kind of drama lives or dies. If the actors can't sell that shift, if they can't make you believe that love curdled into war, the revenge feels hollow. Here, even without getting into specific line readings, the vibe is that the show understands the intimacy of enemies. Betrayal is intimate. Revenge is intimate. They are still connected, the connection just becomes poisonous. There's a particular kind of scene the drama likes to return to: public spaces where private devastation happens. A gathering, a meeting, a formal setting where everyone is watching but pretending not to. Those scenes are catnip for melodrama because they force characters to perform composure while they are dying inside. And the female lead's performance in those moments is the show's secret sauce. You watch her swallow emotions like glass, then later you see her alone and the composure cracks, not in an ugly breakdown meant to entertain you, but in a controlled release that makes you respect her even more. It's the difference between "she's strong because she doesn't cry" and "she's strong because she keeps moving even while she cries." One more craft thing before I keep going, because this matters: the show uses transitions like emotional whiplash on purpose. You'll go from a soft memory-like moment to a hard present moment, and the cut isn't gentle. It's abrupt. It's like the editors want you to feel how trauma works. You don't process betrayal in a straight line. You get yanked back and forth between what you believed and what you know. The drama mimics that. It's not always smooth, but it is effective. It leaves you unsettled, which is exactly where the story wants you, unsettled enough to crave the moment she finally becomes the storm. And when she does start stepping into that storm identity, it's not just the plot that changes. The entire emotional contract with the viewer changes. Because now the question isn't, will she survive this? The question becomes, what is she willing to become to make them pay? And that's where the show starts flirting with moral ambiguity in a way I didn't fully expect. It's easy to root for revenge when the villains are monstrous. It's harder, and more interesting, when the revenge starts to feel absolute. When it starts to threaten to consume parts of her that you don't want her to lose. The drama walks that line carefully, and you can feel it testing you as a viewer. Do you want justice, or do you want annihilation? That tension is exactly why the later confrontations, again, speaking generally, start to feel like more than just girl boss moments. They become philosophical. They become about what vows mean when one person treats them as sacred and the other treats them as leverage. They become about whether love is inherently disempowering, or whether the problem was never love, it was choosing someone who saw love as an opening to exploit. And every time the show circles that question, it tightens the knot in your chest a little more, because you realize the betrayer didn't just break her heart, he tried to break her belief in devotion itself, and watching her rebuild that belief into something sharper is where the real satisfaction starts to live, because the most brutal revenge isn't taking his money or his status, it's proving that his betrayal didn't get to define what she is, and when she finally looks at him from that place of untouchable calm, you can practically see the moment he understands he didn't destroy her, he only taught her where to aim. And the way the scene is framed, you start waiting for the first real strike to land as she steps forward and decides that the next move is going to be made on her terms, not his, not theirs, not anyone's but hers. And that's where the drama's energy shifts into this quietly dangerous gear where every glance feels like a contract being rewritten and every silence feels like a verdict being prepared, because she's not returning to ask for anything, she's returning to collect, starting with the thing they assumed she'd never take back, which is control over the story they tried to steal from her. And the moment she reaches that internal decision, you can feel how the show is about to start showing you what cast you down actually looks like in practice when the goddess stops pleading and starts choosing the exact pressure points that will make the betrayers realize they built their entire life on the assumption she'd stay gentle, and she is done proving them right by being kind to people who never deserved it. And so the next sequence leans into her first calculated move in a way that's tense enough that you almost forget to breathe while you're watching her set the board without anyone in the room realizing she's the one deciding where the pieces go, because she's smiling, she's polite, she's composed, and underneath that composure there's this unmistakable sense that she's already begun the dismantling, and all that remains is for them to notice it, and that's honestly one of my favorite flavors of revenge storytelling, the kind where the protagonist doesn't need to announce herself with thunder, because the thunder is already scheduled. She's sitting there in the same world that tried to swallow her, and she's suddenly fluent in its language again, except now she's speaking it like a weapon. And the show is so smug about letting you in on that shift. It doesn't always tell you the plan, but it shows you the attitude of someone who has a plan. And if you've ever been around a person who's quietly decided they are done being pushed around, you know that vibe is unmistakable. It's calm. It's almost tender. It's also terrifying. There's a particular kind of confidence that doesn't look like confidence until it's too late. Broken Vows nails that. The drama keeps giving you these moments where the betrayers think they're in control because she's not raising her voice. She's not throwing a glass. She's not making a scene. And the camera just hangs there, giving you that delicious audience privilege of seeing the trap being built in real time. Like, you're watching someone lay out a velvet tablecloth over a bear trap. It's pretty. It's elegant. And then you remember what's underneath. What I love, and what I think a lot of revenge dramas miss, is the show's patience with her intelligence. It doesn't treat her as a pawn who needs a savior or a mentor to become powerful. The implication is that she's been powerful. She's been strategic. She's been capable. She simply redirected that capability into love, and love made her generous. Betrayal doesn't give her strength, it redirects her strength back toward herself. That distinction matters. It makes her comeback feel like self-restoration rather than a personality transplant. And the show is very aware that the betrayer's biggest advantage wasn't money or connections. It was access. He had access to her tenderness. He had access to her trust. He had access to the private version of her that the world doesn't get. When that access gets revoked, he doesn't just lose a partner, he loses the only person in the room who ever saw him as more than what he could provide. That's why, when he starts panicking later, again, speaking generally because I'm not here to hand you a checklist of scenes, the panic feels like more than fear of consequences. It feels like the terror of someone realizing the audience that mattered most has left the theater. Let's talk about the emotional mechanics of the humiliation arc for a second, because this is where the writing either earns your trust or loses it. Broken Vows does something sly. It doesn't just show her being hurt, it shows the social ecosystem that makes that hurt possible. The accomplices aren't just cartoon henchmen. They are opportunists. They are people who sense a power vacuum and run toward it like it's a heater in winter. And that's painfully realistic. Betrayal in these stories is rarely a solo act. It's a group project. Somebody supplies the lie, somebody spreads it, somebody benefits, somebody pretends not to know. The drama makes you feel that collective cowardice, and it makes her revenge feel aimed at more than one man's ego. It's aimed at a whole web. Here's where I'm going to drop another hook in your lap. The show keeps asking, without saying it outright, who deserves to be punished in a betrayal story? Is it only the person who broke the vows? Or is it also everyone who stood around clapping because they thought the goddess had finally fallen? That question starts as a whisper early on, and by the time the comeback is in motion, it turns into a blade. And because the audience is newcomers here, I want to say this plainly: if you've never watched it, she returns and destroys them drama, you might think the pleasure is purely in the revenge. It's not. The real pleasure is in watching the power dynamics flip. It's watching people who used to talk over her suddenly having to listen. It's watching someone who used to be dismissed walk into a room and cause a physical change in the air. Broken Vows understands that psychological satisfaction, and it stages scenes to maximize it. A lot of that staging is done through blocking and eye lines. The drama keeps putting her in positions where she's technically outnumbered, technically surrounded, but the frame makes it clear she's not trapped anymore. She's centered. She's steady. The others are the ones shifting, leaning, glancing at each other for reassurance. That's a smart visual way to show power without having to write a monologue every 5 minutes. And yes, the show does give you some monologue energy later. But it earns it. The costuming is doing heavy lifting too, and I don't just mean, she wears expensive outfits now. It's the difference between clothing that invites and clothing that warms. Early looks feel like they are meant to be approachable, soft textures, gentle lines, warmth. Later, the silhouettes feel sharper, more deliberate. It's as if the wardrobe department asked, what would a woman wear if she wanted to be underestimated by no one? And the answer isn't necessarily louder. It's cleaner. It's controlled. And that control becomes part of her aura. Music-wise, I'm impressed by how often the show chooses restraint. It would be so easy to blast triumphant revenge music every time she takes a step forward. But a lot of the best moments are scored with something subtler, sometimes even eerie, like the show is acknowledging that vengeance isn't pure. It's intoxicating, yes, but it's also a little corrosive. That makes the tone richer. It keeps the drama from collapsing into pure wish fulfillment. And let me be honest, I'm the exact target audience for a well-executed, Return of the Goddess story. I like a character who stops apologizing for existing. I like watching arrogance get punished. I like that deep satisfaction of seeing someone who thought vows were a joke realize they were playing with a person's life. So I came into this ready to have fun. What surprised me is how often I found myself feeling protected rather than just entertained. There's something about the way the show frames her devotion that feels sacred, for lack of a better word. Not because devotion should be worshipped blindly, but because it's rare to see love treated as strength on screen without immediately punishing the character for it. This drama does punish her, but it also insists that her love was not shameful. The shame belongs to the people who exploited it. Now, the male betrayer. The show's approach to him is interesting because it's walking a tightrope between make him hateable and make him believable. It's very easy to write a man like this as pure evil and call it a day. Broken Vows gives him enough plausibility that you can see how she ended up loving him in the first place, and that makes the betrayal sting more. And then, as he spirals, the drama shows you the anatomy of entitlement. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to win while still being seen as the good guy. He wants the benefits of betrayal without the social cost. That's where the drama gets its teeth, it makes the cost unavoidable. And yes, there's usually another woman energy in these setups, or at least another axis of temptation and ambition. I'm not going to pin it down into specific characters because we're respecting the fact-safety boundary, but the drama absolutely plays with that triangle or square of desire, status, and opportunism. What I appreciated is that it doesn't frame the female protagonist's pain as competition for male attention. Her pain is about being treated as disposable. Her comeback is about refusing disposability. That's a crucial difference. It means the story's core isn't, I'll win him back or I'll steal him back. It's, I'm done letting you define my value. Let's sit in one of the show's most effective mini-scenes, because I think it demonstrates why this drama hits even when it's operating in familiar genre lanes. There's a late early or mid-season type of moment, one of those threshold scenes, where she's in a public setting, and the betrayer is performing his new narrative. You know the one. He's acting like he's above it, like he's moved on, like she's the problem, like he's the victim of her dramatic emotions. The people around them are eating it up because social cruelty loves a simple story. And the camera stays with her. You can almost feel her swallowing the impulse to argue, to defend herself. She opens her mouth like she's going to say something, and then she stops. There's this small pause. She closes it. Breathes. And instead of fighting his narrative directly, she does something far more destabilizing. She refuses to play the role he assigned her. She doesn't chase him. She doesn't beg. She just looks at him like he's a stranger who's overestimating his importance. The sound drops out a little. The lighting feels colder. And you watch him falter, just slightly, because he wanted her to react. He needed her reaction to validate his story. Her silence becomes a rejection. That's not an action sequence. That's not even a plot twist. But emotionally? That's a punch. That's what I mean when I say the acting is doing a lot here. The female lead's performance is all about controlled micro-reactions. She's playing someone whose pride and heart are in constant negotiation. The betrayals force her into environments where she can't collapse. So her breakdowns, when they happen, often private, and they are not glamorous. They're the kind of quiet grief that looks like staring at a wall too long. Like washing your hands and realizing you're still shaking. Like sitting in a car, not crying, just trying to find your breath. That's the stuff that makes the later power fantasy feel grounded. And the show does something else that I think deserves credit. It lets her be angry without making her unlikable. A lot of dramas, especially ones that still carry the residue of women must be pure to be sympathetic, will punish a female lead for rage. They'll make her rage irrational or petty or cruel in ways that undermine her. Broken Vows frames rage as appropriate. And it doesn't mean she's always right in every method she chooses, but it never treats her fury as hysteria. That's a big deal. That's modern melodrama done with respect. Here's the next rehook. If the show were only about revenge, it would be satisfying for a weekend and then evaporate. The reason it sticks in your head is that it's also about belief. What happens to your belief in promises after someone weaponizes them against you? And can you rebuild belief without becoming naive again? The drama's title is doing a lot of narrative work. Broken Vows is obvious, the sacred promise shattered. But the goddess casts you down is the more interesting half, because it implies judgment. It implies consequence. It implies that there's a moral order to this universe, and even if the courts don't get you, even if society claps for your betrayal, there will be a reckoning. The show treats the goddess like a force of nature. And that could be cheesy, but it leans into the symbolism with enough seriousness that it lands as mythic rather than cringe. There's also a subtle critique of class and status baked into this. The betrayer's greed and status hunger aren't just personal flaws, they are symptoms of a system where appearances matter more than character. People are rewarded for image management. They are rewarded for marrying well, networking well, lying well. The female lead's hidden power is interesting because it flips that system. She's someone who can play the game at the highest level, but she chose love instead. And the system punished her for that choice because it couldn't categorize her properly. She's not supposed to be both powerful and devoted. The drama is basically saying, watch what happens when the system meets someone it can't control. The pacing in the comeback portion is where I got genuinely addicted. The show starts moving like a chess game. You get a series of moves that aren't always flashy, but they accumulate. A reputational shift here. A business relationship strained there. A public perception turning like a slow tide. And the editing emphasizes accumulation rather than isolated victories. You'll feel the montage energy sometimes, sure, but it's often more about pressure than about fireworks. That's smart, because real downfall rarely happens in one cinematic moment. It happens when support structures get quietly pulled away until the person collapses. Now, because we're doing moderate spoilers, I'm going to stay away from describing exactly what she does to dismantle their businesses and reputations. But I can talk about the storytelling effect. The show makes her revenge feel systematic. It's not random vengeance. It's targeted. She learns what they value most and threatens it. And there's a psychological realism to that. If you want to hurt someone who hurt you, you don't hit where it doesn't matter. You hit where they build their identity. And that leads into one of the more uncomfortable pleasures of this drama, watching the betrayer's pride become his Achilles heel. Pride is a delicious villain weakness because it makes the villain do your work for you. The betrayer keeps underestimating her because admitting her capability would require admitting his mistake. And he can't do that. Not publicly. Not internally. So he doubles down. He overreaches. He gets sloppy. And the show frames that sloppiness with this quiet, almost amused tone, like, yeah, that's what arrogance looks like when it starts rotting. I also liked how the drama handles the concept of true identity. In a lot of shows, the hidden identity reveal is treated like a twist. Here, it's treated like inevitability. The drama seems less interested in shocking you with what she is and more interested in showing you how she chooses to use it. That's important because it keeps the story from feeling like it's cheating. It's not, surprise, she's powerful, so she wins. It's, she's powerful, but power is useless if you keep handing it to someone else. There's also a relationship thread that's not romantic but still emotionally crucial, her relationship with herself. It sounds cheesy, but that's what the comeback arc is. She has to forgive herself for believing. She has to stop treating her devotion like evidence of stupidity. And the drama does a good job showing that self-forgiveness is not instant. It comes in fits. She'll have a moment of confidence, then a wave of grief. She'll make a brilliant strategic move, then later stare at a reminder of what she lost and look genuinely wrecked. That seesaw is what makes her feel like a person rather than a fantasy. A lot of viewers will want to rush past the grief because the revenge is the dessert. But grief is the meal that makes the dessert taste like something. And I think the show knows that. It keeps threading emotional consequences through the power fantasy so it doesn't become hollow. Quick human aside, because I need to say it, the first time the drama really let her enter a space with that transformed energy, I did that thing where you sit up and you're like, oh, it's starting. I was alone. I still reacted like someone could see me. I don't know who I was performing for, but apparently my living room needed to witness my excitement. That's the kind of show this is when it's working. It makes you physically respond. The cinematography supports that too. There's a noticeable change in how the camera moves around her. Early on, the camera feels more observational, almost gentle. After the shift, it becomes more deliberate. It glides. It frames her with symmetry, giving her a kind of icon-like presence. It uses negative space differently. It'll place her in a frame that makes other characters look like they're orbiting her rather than facing her. That kind of visual language is not subtle, but subtle is not what this genre is about. The genre is about making you feel power. And the production design keeps reinforcing the theme that wealth can be both armor and cage. These glossy spaces look gorgeous, but they also look cold. They are built for display, not comfort. The drama uses that to underline how status-driven relationships are often more about performance than intimacy. When the betrayal happens, it's not just a relationship ending, it's a performance ending. The betrayer isn't just leaving her, he's publicly choosing a different narrative to perform. That's why humiliation is part of the betrayal. Public humiliation is narrative control. So when she comes back, she doesn't just regain money or status. She regains authorship. She walks into rooms as an author, not a character. And that's where the theme becomes surprisingly resonant. A lot of us have had the experience of someone else telling our story for us. Maybe not with millions and corporate empires, but with gossip, with workplace politics, with friend group dynamics, with family narratives. Watching her take authorship back scratches an itch that's bigger than romance. Now, I want to acknowledge a potential criticism, because if you're a critic-type viewer, you might bump against this. The drama is heightened. It's melodramatic by design. Some lines are going to be a little on the nose. Some confrontations are staged to maximize satisfaction rather than realism. And if you're allergic to that, you're not wrong for feeling it. But I'm going to defend the show a little. It's consistent about its heightened tone. It doesn't randomly switch into documentary realism and then back into opera. It stays in its lane. It's a mythic revenge melodrama, and it commits. Also, and this is another slightly contrarian take, I don't think the drama's biggest weakness is that it's too unrealistic. I think the bigger risk is that it sometimes makes the betrayers too collectively foolish. When everyone around the betrayer is written as opportunistic and short-sighted, it can flatten the social world. The show mostly avoids that by giving some side characters more texture, people who hesitate, people who regret, people who misjudge but aren't purely evil. but there are moments where the villain ecosystem feels a little too eager to be villainous. It didn't ruin it for me, but I felt it. That said, when the drama wants to be emotionally precise, it is. And the precision is often in the way it shows her learning. Not learning tactics, she already has tactics. Learning boundaries. Learning that vows are sacred only if both people treat them as sacred. Learning that devotion without self-respect becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. The show doesn't preach that. It demonstrates it. It makes you watch her pay the price for not knowing it, and then it makes you watch her refuse to pay again. Here's something else that's quietly strong: the show doesn't treat revenge as purely external. The external revenge is the plot. But the internal revenge is her healing through action. And yes, action can be a coping mechanism, but the drama frames it as reclamation. She doesn't just take them down, she rebuilds her sense of self by proving to herself that she can move in the world again. That she's not stuck in the moment of betrayal forever. That's what makes the comeback cathartic. It's not just punishment. It's motion. The male betrayer's arc is also handled in a way that makes the climax promise feel satisfying. Because the show doesn't keep him static. It shows him adapting, scrambling, trying to regain control. And that matters, because a revenge story where the villain just sits there waiting to be punished is boring. Here, you get the sense that he's actively trying to protect his pride and status, which forces her to be smarter. The conflict stays dynamic. And the show keeps returning to vows as a symbol. Not just romantic vows, but the idea of promise as social glue. When promises mean nothing, society becomes predatory. That's kind of the show's underlying worldview. It's not naive about it. It doesn't pretend that promises always hold. But it treats the breaking of vows as a moral event, not just a relationship event. That's why the goddess metaphor works. It's moral gravity. There's a moment in the middle stretch where I felt the show really clicked into its identity. The tone becomes less about heartbreak and more about inevitability. You start to feel like the downfall is already written, and you're just watching it unfold. The show starts planting consequences with a steady hand. A small humiliation for the betrayer here. A minor loss of face there. And you can see the audience being trained to savor incremental justice rather than waiting for one big explosion. That incremental approach is also what keeps the pacing from burning out. If the show went straight to total destruction too early, it would have nowhere to go. Instead, it escalates. It lets the betrayers think they've escaped consequences, then shows a consequence landing from a direction they didn't anticipate. That creates suspense even though the genre promise is clear. You know she's going to rise. The fun is watching how. And that how is often communicated through editing choices that emphasize reaction shots. The show loves reaction shots. It loves showing you the moment someone realizes they miscalculated her. Those are the little dopamine hits. And when the acting is good, a reaction shot can be more satisfying than a slap. You see a smug face falter. You see a confident posture stiffen. You see someone's eyes flicker to the exits because suddenly the room doesn't feel safe. That's the good stuff. Let me talk about the sound again for a second, because I don't think people give sound design enough credit in these kinds of dramas. There's a way the show uses ambient sound to heighten humiliation. In public scenes, you'll hear the soft murmur of people, the clink of glasses, the click of cameras, the faint echo of footsteps, and it builds this sense that she's being observed by society itself. When she's alone, the sound empties out. You hear the smallest things. A breath. A fabric shift. A distant city hum. It makes loneliness feel physical. And then when she starts plotting, the sound tightens. It becomes precise. That sonic precision mirrors her mental precision. The show also uses lighting as emotional punctuation. Warmth equals trust. Coolness equals performance. Harsh bright light equals exposure. Dim light equals private truth. It's basic visual language, but it's executed consistently enough that you start reading scenes emotionally before the dialogue even lands. Now, I can't pretend I know how the wider audience is reacting in real time, but I can guess there's going to be a split. Some people will say, she should have left sooner. Some people will say, why is she even giving him air? And I get that reaction. But I want to push back slightly. The story isn't about what a perfect, self-protective person would do. It's about what a devoted person does when devotion is exploited. Devotion is messy. It's stubborn. It tries to repair what it didn't break. And the show treats that stubbornness as both a flaw and a proof of humanity. Also, the drama is very aware that humiliation is part of the genre's contract. It's a power fantasy that starts with powerlessness. The key is whether the show uses humiliation to make the protagonist smaller or to set up the moment she refuses to be made small ever again. Broken Vows mostly does the latter. It uses humiliation as a springboard, not a cage. The goddess idea also adds this interesting spiritual undertone, even though the story isn't literally supernatural. It frames her comeback as something almost karmic. Like she's not just getting revenge, she's restoring balance. That's why the climax promise, him begging her in absolute power, doesn't feel like a random cruelty fantasy. It feels like mythic consequence. You broke vows, you invited judgment. Here's a question that kept nagging me, and I think it's one of the drama's quiet strengths: does revenge actually heal? The show doesn't answer that with a simple yes. It shows revenge as satisfying, yes. It also shows it as isolating. The more she steps into power, the fewer people she can trust. Because now everyone sees her as a force. Everyone wants something from her. That's a lonely place to live. The drama doesn't wallow in that loneliness, but it doesn't ignore it either. It makes her power feel earned and expensive. And the loneliness connects back to the vows theme. Vows are about partnership, about shared burden. When vows break, you're suddenly carrying everything alone. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just hurt you, it removes your sense of shared reality. So her comeback is, in a way, her building a new shared reality with herself. It's her saying, I am enough to hold my world together. There's a particular kind of scene the drama does really well, the moment where someone tries to gaslight her, and she refuses. She doesn't argue. She doesn't try to convince them of what happened. She just looks at them like they're speaking the wrong language. That refusal is powerful because gaslighting feeds on engagement. It feeds on your need to be understood by the person who's committed to misunderstanding you. When she stops needing that, the gaslighting collapses. And if you've ever been in that dynamic in any form, romantic, professional, family, you know why those scenes hit. It's not just revenge. It's liberation. The show's structure also keeps giving you these emotional crescendos followed by quieter stretches, and that can feel like a drag if you're only here for fireworks. But I think those quieter stretches are where the drama earns its longevity. It gives you time to feel the emotional impact of what's happening. It lets you sit in the consequences. Without that, the revenge would feel like a video game: level up, boss fight, repeat. Instead, it feels like a life being rebuilt. Now, I do want to talk about one weakness that popped up for me as I watched. Because I'm not going to pretend it's flawless just because I loved it. There are moments where the show's dialogue leans into explain the theme out loud mode. Like, a character will say something that feels like it's meant to be quoted on social media rather than spoken in the moment. And sometimes that works. Melodrama loves a line. But occasionally it can break immersion. The good news is that the actors usually sell it. They deliver those lines with enough emotional grounding that you forgive the writerly flourish. Another potential issue is that the show sometimes flirts with making her too invincible. There's a thin line between competent protagonist and protagonist who always wins because the plot says so. Broken Vows mostly keeps her grounded by showing emotional vulnerability and showing that she's not omniscient. She learns, adjusts, misjudges. But you can feel the temptation to make her a perfect avenger. I personally don't mind a bit of fantasy. This genre is basically therapy with expensive lighting, but I know some viewers prefer more friction. Still, when the show is firing on all cylinders, it delivers that delicious, almost primal satisfaction of watching a social predator get outplayed. And it does it without turning her into the same kind of predator. That's important. She's ruthless, yes, but the framing suggests she's not doing this for fun. She's doing it because she has to. Because if she doesn't, the betrayers will keep taking. They'll keep using people. They'll keep breaking vows and walking away clean. Her revenge becomes a deterrent. A warning sign. And the drama keeps reinforcing that warning sign energy with its visual motifs. Mirrors, reflections, glass walls, glossy surfaces that show you how much of this world is about appearance. The goddess doesn't just smash the mirror. She uses it. She forces the betrayers to see themselves in it, to confront the ugliness they've been hiding behind charm and status. That's why the confrontations are satisfying. They are not just about external loss. They're about exposure. Let's lean into the exposure theme for a second. The show is obsessed with public versus private. The vows happen in a private emotional space. The betrayal happens with public consequences. The revenge, therefore, has to happen in both realms. She has to dismantle not just their actual resources but their public narrative. And the show knows public narrative is often more powerful than truth. That's why reputation is a battlefield. It's also why the drama's editing pays so much attention to facial reactions in group scenes. Because reputation shifts happen in expressions before they happen in words. Someone doubts the betrayer for half a second. Someone stops laughing at his joke. Someone avoids eye contact. Those micro moments are how power leaks. The show highlights them just enough to make you feel the tide turning. Another rehook, because I can feel the story tightening. The closer she gets to the big confrontation, the more the show starts asking whether casting someone down is justice, or whether it becomes its own kind of vow, an unspoken vow to never be powerless again, no matter what it costs. There's a moment, later in the narrative arc, where you can feel that vow forming inside her. Not a romantic vow. A survival vow. The show frames it like a line being crossed. It's not the first time she fights back, but it's the first time you sense she's willing to go all the way. And as a viewer, you get this mixed feeling. Part of you cheers. Part of you worries. Because you like her. You don't want her to lose herself. But you also want them to pay. The drama plays that contradiction like a violin. And that contradiction is, in my opinion, the difference between a good revenge drama and a forgettable one. A forgettable one is pure sugar. A good one has bitterness. Broken Vows has bitterness. It makes you taste the price of power even while you enjoy it. I also want to highlight how the drama uses the betrayer's begging as a future promise rather than immediate gratification. It's foreshadowed emotionally. The show keeps showing you how he performs confidence, how he treats her like she's beneath him, how he expects forgiveness as a default setting, and it's clearly setting up the inversion. So when he eventually hits that point of desperation, when the pride is stripped away, it's not just satisfying because it's humiliating. It's satisfying because it's symmetrical. He made her beg emotionally. The story makes him beg socially. He made her feel small privately. The story makes him feel small publicly. That symmetry is the goddess's judgment. Now, since I'm not inventing specifics, I'll describe the dismantling phase in terms of what it feels like to watch. It feels like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, except the dominoes are made of ego and money and reputation. Each time one falls, you see the betrayers react with denial. Then anger. Then bargaining. And the female lead, this is the best part, rarely reacts at all. Her calm becomes its own kind of cruelty. Not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but cruelty as consequence. The calm says, this is happening. I'm not going to argue with you about it. That calm is also what makes the title, Goddess, resonate. Because gods in myths don't plead. They don't explain themselves to mortals. They judge. They act. That mythic posture is what she steps into, and the show frames it as both empowering and a little chilling. Because let's be real, absolute power is scary, even when you're rooting for it. And that's where the show's moral ambiguity gets interesting. It makes you root for her absolute power because you've seen the betrayal. You've seen the humiliation. You've felt the injustice. And then it whispers, okay. Now what? It doesn't fully condemn her. It doesn't fully sanctify her either. It lets the tension exist. It lets you, the viewer, sit in that messy place where revenge is both right and dangerous. Acting-wise, I want to shout out the way the Betrayer's actor, again, not naming specifics, handles the shift from smugness to fear. Because fear can be played in such a cheesy way. Overacting, sweating, wild eyes. But the most effective fear is subtle. It's the micro flicker of calculation failing. It's the forced laugh that lands wrong. It's the moment someone realizes their usual charm isn't working. When the show gives him those beats. It's incredibly satisfying because it feels like watching a mask slip. And mask slipping is the whole point of this drama. The show also uses close-ups strategically. Early close-ups emphasize romance, eyes, hands, soft expressions. Later close-ups emphasize control, a steady gaze, a tightened mouth, a finger pausing on a phone screen, a pen hovering over a signature. It makes mundane objects feel like weapons. That's good melodrama craft. It turns the everyday into a battlefield. If you're a newcomer, you might be surprised by how much business and reputation stuff takes up emotional space in a romance revenge story. But in this genre, those things are never just business. Business is power. Reputation is survival. And the vows, in a way, were also a business agreement, at least in the betrayer's mind. He treated her love like an asset. She responds by treating his assets like liabilities. One of the most emotionally brutal subtexts that drama plays with is the idea that some people only respect you when you can hurt them. And that's depressing, but it's real. The female lead is respected more as a threat than she ever was as a partner. That's a tragedy embedded inside the triumph. The show doesn't say it out loud, but you can feel it. When she's loving, she's taken for granted. When she's ruthless, she's feared. And fear, in this world, is a kind of respect. That's why the goddess persona is both empowering and sad. It's empowering because she stops being exploited. It's sad because it implies that softness is unsafe. The drama doesn't fully resolve that sadness, at least not in the portion I'm talking about now. It lets it hang in the air like smoke. Now, I don't want to ignore the entertainment factor, because this show is not just a thematic essay with pretty lighting. It's fun. It has those moments where you laugh because the audacity is so high. Not because it's a comedy, but because revenge melodrama sometimes hits a level of, oh, you thought, that triggers a giggle. The show knows how to deliver that. It knows the timing of a reveal, the timing of a silent stare, the timing of someone realizing they're trapped in a narrative they can't control anymore. There's a particular kind of pleasure in watching someone who's been underestimated start moving like a predator. And I don't mean predator in a moral sense, I mean predator in the sense of being alert, strategic, aware of weakness. The female lead starts noticing things she used to ignore. She starts reading rooms. She starts anticipating reactions. And the show communicates that not with exposition, but with rhythm. Scenes become quicker. Dialogue becomes sharper. The pauses become intentional. You feel her mind working. Here's another little personal confession, I'm a sucker for the stillness before the storm scenes. Those moments where she's about to walk into a confrontation and you see her take one breath, just something small, and then enter. It's such a simple trope, but it works on me every time. Broken Vows uses that stillness well. It doesn't overuse it. It picks its moments. So when it happens, it feels like a bell ringing. Something is about to shift. And in terms of social commentary, the show is absolutely dragging the idea that women are expected to be endlessly forgiving. There's this cultural script that says a woman's virtue is measured by her willingness to endure. Broken Vows flips that script and says, no, virtue might actually be refusing to let harm go unpunished. That's spicy. That's going to make some viewers uncomfortable. And honestly, good. Stories should make you uncomfortable sometimes, especially when they're interrogating norms that are quietly cruel. Another subtle detail, the drama doesn't present her revenge as purely reactive. At a certain point, it becomes proactive. She's not just responding to their moves, she's creating circumstances that force their moves. That's a crucial shift in agency. It's the difference between escaping a cage and building a new world where the cage can't exist. The drama frames that as her stepping into her true identity, which again, isn't about a secret bank account or a hidden title. It's about mentality. It's about refusing to be a passenger in your own life. Now, I want to talk about the emotional palette of the show, because it's not one-note rage. It's grief, yes. It's anger, yes. But it's also shame, and shame is harder to dramatize. The show understands that betrayal triggers shame in the victim even though the victim did nothing wrong. That's one of the ugliest truths about betrayal, you feel embarrassed for believing. The female lead carries that shame early on. You see her trying to hide it. You see her trying to maintain dignity. And her transformation includes shedding shame. Not shedding grief, grief stays, but shedding shame. That's powerful. There's also a tender undercurrent of mourning for the life she thought she had. The show doesn't treat that mourning as weakness. It treats it as loss. Because even if the man was a liar, the love was real. The dreams were real. And losing those dreams is a legitimate grief. Revenge doesn't erase that grief. It sits alongside it. Broken Vows allows that complexity, and that's one of the reasons it feels more emotionally honest than some of its genre peers. Let's zoom in on the notion of sacred vows, because the drama uses sacredness as a narrative weapon. Sacredness implies a boundary. When that boundary is violated, it's not just a personal betrayal, it's sacrilege. That might sound dramatic, but the show is dramatic, and it uses that sacred framing to justify the scale of the revenge. It's telling you, this wasn't a small wrong. This was a fundamental violation. That's why the consequences are so extreme. And because it frames it as sacrilege, the female lead's revenge is framed as ritual. She's not just retaliating, she's performing judgment. The show stages some of her power moves with a kind of ceremonial vibe. The camera lingers. The music holds. The environment feels like a temple of status. And she walks through it like a deity reclaiming space. Again, mythic. Heightened. But effective. Here's a rehook that matters. The drama is not only asking whether the betrayer deserves to fall. It's also asking whether the goddess can ever go back to being a woman in love after she learns what love cost her. That question hangs over everything. Even in the most satisfying revenge moments, you feel that underlying sadness. Because the goddess persona protects her, but it might also wall her off. And that's the emotional engine that keeps the story from becoming monotonous. You're not just waiting for punishment, you're watching someone navigate what kind of person she becomes in the aftermath. Now, let's talk about chemistry again, because I think it's a key factor in why this drama works for newcomers. Even if you don't care about corporate takedowns or status games, you'll care about the relational tension. The show establishes early intimacy well enough that you understand what was lost. Without that, the revenge wouldn't matter, it would just be numbers on a scoreboard. The early warmth is what makes the later coldness hit. And the later coldness has its own chemistry. The female lead and the betrayer become like two magnets flipped the wrong way. They repel, but they can't fully separate because their lives are tangled. That creates scenes where every word has double meaning. Every polite phrase feels like a knife wrapped in lace. That's good writing. That's good performance. And it's fun to watch because it feels like verbal sparring at a high level. The show also uses silence as dialogue. There are moments where the female lead's refusal to respond is the loudest possible response. And because the actress is good at controlling her expression, those silences are readable. You can see thoughts passing behind her eyes without her having to say them. That's the kind of performance you don't always get in melodrama, where actors are often asked to play everything big. Here, the bigness is in the circumstance, and she plays the internal shift with restraint. It's a smart choice. On the flip side, when the drama does ask for bigger emotion, she delivers. The breakdown moments, again, private, controlled, not spectacle, are convincing. They feel like exhaustion rather than theatrics. That matters because it makes her strength believable. Strength without exhaustion is cartoonish. Strength with exhaustion is human. There's another aspect worth mentioning: the show's sense of justice is not purely legal. It's social. It's psychological. It's reputational. That aligns with how betrayal often plays out in reality. Sometimes you don't get legal justice for someone breaking your trust. You get social justice, if you're lucky. Or you get nothing. This drama gives you the fantasy of getting everything: legal, social, emotional justice. But it roots the satisfaction in social dynamics. The goddess doesn't just win in court, she wins in rooms. She wins in gazes. She wins in the unspoken hierarchy of who gets to stand tall. That's why the climax promise of him begging is so satisfying. Begging is not just an emotional act, it's a social inversion. It's the powerful becoming powerless in front of witnesses. The show understands that humiliation is a weapon, and it's a weapon the betrayer used first. So when the goddess uses it back, it feels like poetic symmetry rather than gratuitous cruelty. Still, the show does walk close to cruelty sometimes. And I think it wants you to feel that discomfort. Because revenge is cruel. Even when deserved, it's not gentle. The drama doesn't sanitize that. It makes you enjoy it and then makes you notice you enjoyed it. That's a little manipulative, sure, but in a smart way. It turns the audience into a participant. And that's also where the sound and editing contribute. The show will sometimes cut away before you get the full satisfaction, forcing you to sit in anticipation. Or it will linger just long enough on a defeated expression to make you feel the weight of consequence. Those choices shape your emotional response. The drama is not just telling a story, it's conducting your feelings like a composer. Now, let's talk about the accomplices part of the betrayal, because this matters thematically. The female lead isn't just betrayed by one man, she's betrayed by a network of people who benefit from her downfall. That network could include friends, colleagues, social circles. Again, I'm not assigning specifics. But the point is, betrayal is communal. And the drama uses that to make her revenge feel like a purge of a corrupt ecosystem. It's not just punish him. It's clean the rot. And the more she cleans, the more the drama explores the idea that power reveals character. People who were neutral suddenly pick sides. People who were friendly suddenly show their opportunism. People who were silent suddenly speak when it's safe. This is social realism dressed in glossy drama clothing. And it's satisfying because you recognize it. You've seen people switch up when the winds change. There's a scene type that appears during the dismantling phase that I always watch for in these stories, the moment where someone tries to crawl back. The "I always supported you" crowd. The "I didn't mean it" crowd. The "it was a misunderstanding" crowd. Broken Vows handles those moments with a sharpness I enjoyed. The goddess doesn't waste time litigating their excuses. She treats them like background noise. That's one of the most empowering fantasies, not having to argue with people who wronged you. Just moving forward without them. Also, the drama doesn't forget that vengeance is exhausting. Even if she's powerful, she's still human. The show includes moments where you sense the weight of what she's doing. The planning. The vigilance. The constant need to anticipate sabotage. It's not all champagne toasts and slow-motion entrances. There's a grind to it. And the grind makes the power feel earned. Here's another small, vivid sensory moment that stuck with me. There's a type of shot the drama uses repeatedly where she's alone in a large space. Could be an office, a home, hallway, somewhere that emphasizes scale. You hear her footsteps echo. The room is too quiet. The space is too big. That echo becomes a reminder that power doesn't automatically fill emptiness. It just makes emptiness louder. That's the kind of visual metaphor that elevates the show beyond pure trope. Now, I'm going to talk about the theme of mistaking love for weakness, because it's the core sin of the betrayers. The drama is basically staging a moral lesson: if you exploit someone's love, you are creating your own downfall. Not because the universe is magically fair, but because you're teaching someone who already has power that they should stop being merciful. You're training your own judge. And the show makes that feel inevitable. The betrayers are so convinced they've won that they don't realize they are building the goddess with their cruelty. That's also why the drama's title feels like a warning. It's like the show is looking at every would-be betrayer in the audience and saying, "You think she's powerless because she's kind. You are incorrect." And that warning energy is part of why it's so bingeable. It's like a moral fable with luxury cars. One thing I'll say about the production, it understands the eroticism of power. Not sexual eroticism necessarily, though tension is tension, but the aesthetic pleasure of watching competence. Watching someone walk into a room and take control. Watching a plan unfold. Watching someone who was once cornered become the corner. The show films that with relish. It uses slow camera moves, crisp focus, deliberate framing. It wants you to savor it. And since this is bongo gaming and I'm speaking like a human who actually watched it, I have to admit, there were moments where I was like, okay, this is ridiculous, and I still smiled. Because sometimes melodrama earns the right to be ridiculous. Sometimes you want the heightened moment. You want the line that's too perfect. You want the villain's face when the rug is pulled. Broken Vows gives you that. It's a feast. But it also gives you quieter pain. And the mixture is why I ended up emotionally invested rather than just entertained. Another rehook, because we're getting into the meat of it, the show's most satisfying moments aren't even the big takedowns. They are the moments where she refuses to be emotionally accessible to the man who broke her. Where she denies him closure. Where she denies him the comfort of her tears. That's when you realize the revenge isn't only external, it's psychological starvation. The betrayer, like many people who break vows, expects to remain central in her emotional world even after he harms her. He expects her anger to prove she still cares. He expects her grief to prove she still belongs to him. When she stops giving him that, he loses a form of control that he didn't even realize he had. And the show milks that loss beautifully. You can feel him scrambling to regain relevance. That's pathetic, yes, but it's also chilling, because it shows how some people measure love by control. And that's where the show's social commentary sharpens. It's not just critiquing betrayal. It's critiquing possession. The idea that marriage or vows give you ownership. The betrayer treats vows like a contract he can break while still keeping the benefits. The goddess treats vows like sacred, and when they are broken, she treats the break as a severing. No benefits. No access. No emotional ownership. That's a powerful stance. Now, if you're wondering whether the show ever risks making her too cold, yes, it flirts with that. There are moments where her ruthlessness could be read as detachment. But the drama usually counterbalances it with glimpses of her interior life, enough to remind you she's still feeling. She's just not offering her feelings to the people who weaponized them. And that, to me, is not cold. That's boundary. There's a particular kind of boundary moment I love in these dramas, when someone tries to trigger the protagonist with a reminder of the past, a romantic memory, a vow, a sentimental object, and the protagonist doesn't bite. Broken Vows uses that tactic. It weaponizes nostalgia against her, and then shows her refusing to be controlled by nostalgia. That's such a real thing. Nostalgia is a trap. Betrayers love to use nostalgia because it makes you doubt your present anger. The show understands that and makes her refusal feel like growth. I also appreciated that the drama doesn't fully absolve her of the complexity of loving someone who didn't deserve it. It doesn't make her say, "I never loved you." It suggests that love was real, and that's what makes betrayal so violent. That's emotionally honest. Pretending love wasn't real is a coping mechanism, but it's not always true. The show allows her to acknowledge love without being trapped by it. Now, the climax as described in the storyline is highly satisfying, with a man begging as she strips away pride and status. Without detailing exactly how that plays out, I can talk about what the show does to prepare that moment. It spends time building his pride. It shows you how much he values image. It shows you how he uses status as armor. It shows you how he expects deference. The goddess's revenge, therefore, is designed to remove deference. To remove the social oxygen he breathes. When he begs, it's not just a man begging. It's a persona begging. It's an identity begging. That's why it lands. And because the drama invests in that preparation, it avoids the common pitfall where the villain's downfall feels too sudden. Here, the downfall feels like gravity. Like the result of accumulated consequences. The goddess doesn't need to invent his downfall. She just needs to remove the scaffolding that was holding him up. Another point on editing, the show uses parallelism well. It will echo earlier emotional beats in later scenes with inverted power dynamics. A gesture that used to be tender becomes threatening. A location that used to be safe becomes a battleground. A phrase that used to be romantic becomes sarcastic or chilling. Those echoes create a sense of poetic justice without the show having to explain it. You just feel the symmetry. Now, I do want to briefly address something that always comes up with revenge goddess dramas. Do they glamorize vengeance in a harmful way? It's a valid question. And I think Broken Vows walks an interesting line. It absolutely glamorizes power. It glamorizes competence. It glamorizes the fantasy of consequence. But it doesn't fully glamorize cruelty for its own sake. It frames vengeance as a response to a profound violation, not as a hobby. And it keeps reminding you, subtly, that there's a cost. That's enough for me to feel comfortable enjoying it as fiction without feeling like it's telling people to be vindictive in real life. It's catharsis. It's myth. And honestly, catharsis has value. Especially for viewers who have felt powerless, ignored, or humiliated. A story where the humiliated person becomes the judge can be emotionally restorative. It can remind you that humiliation doesn't have to be your final chapter. That's not a small thing. Now, if you're still with me, here's where I want to dig deeper into the craft of the comeback confidence, because that's the heart of the experience. The show understands that confidence isn't just what you say, it's what you don't say. The goddess stops explaining herself. She stops seeking approval. She stops negotiating with people who don't negotiate in good faith. And the drama treats that shift as sexy, not in a romance way but in a narrative way. It's narratively sexy to watch a character stop wasting energy. The writing also gives her lines that feel like they come from someone who's learned a hard lesson. Not all of them land perfectly, but the intention is clear. She's no longer speaking in the language of hope. She's speaking in the language of terms, conditions, consequences. And that tonal shift is one of the most satisfying parts of the drama. One more thing, the show's emotional pacing means you might find yourself rooting for outcomes you didn't expect. You might start out wanting her to reconcile, to forgive, to restore the love. And then you'll hit a point where you're like, no. Burn it. That's not because the show is manipulating you cheaply. It's because it's gradually revealing the depth of betrayal and the cruelty of the accomplices. It earns your shift in desire. And that's part of why the drama works for newcomers. It teaches you how to watch it. It trains your emotional appetite. It starts you with romance so you care. It drags you through humiliation so you hurt. Then it offers you revenge so you heal, and then it complicates the healing so you think. That's a satisfying emotional arc. Now, I want to linger on the theme of status for a second, because it's not just a villain motive, it's a character. Status is like a third party in the relationship. The betrayer is seduced by status, controlled by status, terrified of losing status. The goddess, initially, seems less controlled by it. She has it, but she doesn't worship it. That difference is crucial. It's why he betrays. He wants status more than love. It's why she wins. She can use status without being enslaved by it. That's a subtle but powerful moral distinction. And the drama keeps showing you how status distorts morality. People excuse betrayal if it's strategic. They excuse cruelty if it's necessary. They excuse greed if it's ambition. The show drags that hypocrisy into the light. It makes you watch people rationalize harm because the betrayer has social power. And then it makes you watch those rationalizations crumble when the goddess reasserts her power. Suddenly the same people discover morality. Suddenly they care about vows. Suddenly they care about loyalty. That flip is infuriatingly real, and the show knows it. Here's a rehook that's more emotional than plot. The drama's most savage move isn't taking things from him. It's making him realize he never truly had her. Not her respect. Not her soul. He had access to her generosity. That's different. And when she withdraws it, he feels empty. That emptiness is what makes the begging inevitable. Begging isn't just about wanting forgiveness. It's about wanting control back. The show frames his desperation as a tantrum of entitlement. He wants her to reassure him, to make him feel powerful again, to soothe his shame. And she refuses. That refusal is the goddess's judgment. Now, does the show ever risk turning him into a punching bag? A little. But it keeps him dangerous enough that the conflict remains tense. He's not helpless until he is. And the moments where he tries to claw back control are where the drama gets suspenseful. You start wondering, will she overestimate her safety? Will she underestimate his ability to sabotage? The show keeps that threat present, which prevents the revenge from becoming too easy. There's also a delicious irony in the way the show uses vows as a narrative mirror. The betrayer breaks vows because he thinks vows are words. The goddess treats vows as actions. And in the end, she makes him face the action consequence of his words. That's the moral equation of the story. At this point, the drama is deep into its power fantasy groove, but it still finds time to make you feel the original wound. It'll toss in a memory, a reminder of tenderness, a flash of what could have been, and it hits like a bruise. That's smart, because it keeps the revenge from becoming sterile. It reminds you why she's doing this. It reminds you that behind the goddess persona is a person who loved sincerely. That sincerity is what makes her anger righteous. I'll say this too, the show is good at making you feel the difference between pity and respect. Early on, you pity her. You want to protect her. Later, you respect her. You want to follow her. That shift is a testament to the writing and performance. It's hard to move an audience from pity to respect without losing sympathy. Broken Vows manages it by keeping her humanity intact even as she becomes formidable. And the show doesn't forget to make her formidable in ways that aren't just, she has money. It makes her formidable in presence, in speech, in refusal, in strategy. It's not just a bank account. It's a mentality. That's why the goddess metaphor works. She's untouchable not because no one can reach her, but because she no longer offers herself to those who harm her. Now, I want to talk about viewer experience for a second, because this is one of those dramas where you can feel your own morality shifting episode by episode. You start out wanting fairness. Then you want payback. Then you want devastation. Then, sometimes, you pull back and you're like, wait, how far is too far? The show plays with that. It invites you to indulge, then asks you to confront your indulgence. That's a richer experience than pure, girl boss destroys villains, content. But the show is not trying to shame you. It's not wagging its finger. It's just making the emotional landscape textured. It makes the revenge feel like a storm, cleansing and destructive at the same time. There's a particular kind of scene, near the later portion of the narrative, where she confronts someone who wronged her and the confrontation isn't loud. It's quiet. And quiet confrontations can be more brutal because they force the other person to fill the silence with their own guilt. The show uses that tactic. It gives her quiet power. She doesn't need to scream because the facts are screaming. The other person stammers, rationalizes, tries to shift blame. And she just watches. That watching becomes judgment. And you know what? That's the moment the goddess metaphor becomes fully realized. A goddess doesn't argue with mortals. She weighs them. She decides what they deserve. The drama's production design supports that almost religious vibe in later scenes too. Big spaces. High ceilings. Echoing halls. Places that feel like courts or temples of status. The goddess walks through them and you feel like you're watching a ritual. Again, heightened, but effective. Now, one more criticism, because I want to stay honest, sometimes the drama's symbolism can be heavy-handed. The goddess framing is cool, but if you're someone who prefers subtle metaphors, you might roll your eyes at moments where the show leans into it too strongly. There are times it feels like the drama is winking at its own title. Personally, I don't mind. It's part of the genre's fun. But it's worth noting. Still, the emotional truth is what keeps it afloat. Even when it's big, it's emotionally coherent. The betrayal hurts. The humiliation is humiliating. The comeback is empowering. The revenge is satisfying. The cost is real. The coherence is everything. Another rehook, because we're approaching the emotional center of the story's latter half. The most dangerous moment in a revenge arc isn't when you strike your enemy. It's when you realize striking them feels good. The drama flirts with that moment for her, and the way it handles it is what separates shallow revenge from character-driven revenge. You can sense her wrestling with the intoxicating nature of power. Not in a way where she becomes a villain, but in a way where she becomes aware of her own capacity. She realizes she can destroy. And that realization is both empowering and frightening. The show doesn't fully moralize it. It just shows it. That's good storytelling. It trusts the audience to feel the complexity. And it keeps returning to this idea of sacred. Sacred vows. Sacred self. Sacred boundaries. When vows break, something sacred is violated. When she returns, she becomes the enforcer of sacredness. That's the goddess. By the time the drama is fully in revenge mode, you start seeing the betrayer's world shrink. Their rooms feel smaller. Their smiles feel forced. Their conversations feel like damage control. The show communicates that shrinking through claustrophobic framing. Tighter shots. Less breathing room. More visual clutter. It's like the world is closing in on them. And then, when it cuts to her, you get space. Clean lines. Calm air. That contrast is deliberate. It's telling you who is free and who is trapped. And that's another thing, revenge, in this drama, is framed as freedom. Not just punishment. Freedom from being defined by betrayal. Freedom from being underestimated. Freedom from being controlled by the desire to be loved by someone who doesn't deserve you. That's why it resonates beyond the surface plot. I'm going to pause on one emotional moment that hit me harder than I expected. It's not even a big plot beat. It's the vibe of a scene where she's alone after a public confrontation. You can feel the adrenaline wearing off. And there's this emptiness. The kind of emptiness you feel after standing up for yourself for the first time. You think it'll feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels quiet. Sometimes you just feel tired. The show captures that. It doesn't let revenge be purely glamorous. It shows the aftermath. And that aftermath is where you realize she's still carrying pain. She's just carrying it differently. And then the drama does what it does best, it takes that pain and converts it into precision. You watch her stop wasting energy on grief in public and start using energy on action. That conversion is the comeback. That's the goddess rising. Now, the final stretch, as hinted by the storyline, is aiming for that absolute power confrontation. The man begging. The stripping of pride. The dismantling complete. The drama is clearly building to a moment where she stands above them not just socially but morally. And the way it builds is by making sure you understand what pride means to him. Pride is his identity. Pride is his currency. Pride is what he used to hurt her. So stripping pride is not just humiliating him. It's erasing his armor. The show also makes you understand that the goddess isn't doing this because she enjoys humiliation. She's doing it because she wants him to feel what she felt. That's vengeance, yes. But it's also a demand for recognition. Betrayal often leaves the victim feeling unseen. Revenge is sometimes a way of forcing the betrayer to finally see the harm they caused. That's psychologically real, even if the scale is heightened. And the drama, to its credit, doesn't forget the audience's need for catharsis. It doesn't get lost in its own themes and forget to entertain. It keeps delivering those moments where you can't help but react. Where you whisper, yes. Where you wince. Where you laugh at the audacity. That's why it's bingeable. At this point in the narrative arc, the goddess's power feels inevitable. But the question that remains, and the question the show keeps teasing without fully answering yet, is what she's going to do with that power once the betrayers are on their knees. Because there's a difference between destroying someone and moving on. There's a difference between justice and obsession. And you can feel the drama hovering over that line, testing it, because if she becomes defined only by revenge, then the betrayer still wins in a way, he still gets to shape her life. The goddess, ultimately, has to prove that she's bigger than the betrayal. Bigger than the vows that were broken. Bigger than the man who tried to erase her. And the way the story frames her calm suggests she knows that, suggests she's not just aiming for punishment, she's aiming for closure on her terms, which is why the next major confrontation feels less like a fight and more like an execution of a sentence she's already decided, and as the drama moves into that space, you start noticing how even the air around her is filmed differently. Like the world itself is bracing for impact, and the people who once laughed at her pain are suddenly careful with their words because they can feel the temperature drop when she enters, because they are realizing that she hasn't returned to negotiate, she's returned to finalize, and the next time the betrayer tries to speak over her, tries to rewrite the narrative, tries to charm his way out, the show is poised to let her cut through it with one decisive move that will force him to stop performing and start pleading, and the tension in that setup is so thick you can almost hear the silence sharpening right before she opens her mouth to deliver the kind of quiet, irreversible line that changes the balance of the room, and the drama lets you sit inside that microsecond where everyone realizes, at the exact same time, that the old rules don't apply anymore. It's not loud. It's not fireworks. It's the kind of shift you feel in your teeth. The betrayer is still standing there with his practiced smile, still trying to steer the conversation back into the lanes where he's comfortable, still assuming she'll either melt or explode because those are the two reactions he understands. And she gives him neither. She gives him something worse. She gives him composure with a backbone. A calm that doesn't ask permission. And this is where Broken Vows the goddess casts you down really starts flexing the thing it does best, which is using emotional restraint as spectacle. I know that sounds contradictory, but watch any truly satisfying revenge story and you'll see what I mean. The show isn't just delivering, she wins. It's delivering the sensation of watching a person who used to be emotionally cornered become emotionally untouchable. That's the real fantasy. Not the money. Not the status. Not even the takedown. The untouchable calm. The way the drama frames those confrontations is almost predatory in a smart way. It likes to put you in the betrayer's shoes just long enough to feel his confidence, then it yanks you back into her so you can feel his confidence turn into confusion. And confusion is the gateway emotion to fear. People don't get afraid when they think they understand the room. They get afraid when the room stops making sense. She becomes the agent of that nonsense. She becomes the factor he can't control. One of the reasons the goddess metaphor doesn't collapse under its own weight is because the drama keeps insisting that godhood isn't about being perfect. It's about being final. When she chooses something, it's decided. And the show keeps emphasizing finality through little craft choices. A door closing that's held a beat longer than normal. A signature that's shot like a guillotine. A glance that's framed like a verdict. It's not subtle, but it's elegant in how it commits. Now, staying within moderate spoilers, I'm not going to give you the exact sequence of events that lead to the big, begging moment promised by the storyline. But I can talk about how the show builds the emotional runway for it, and why it lands as satisfying instead of cheap. Because the truth is, villain begs at the end is a trope. A lot of dramas do it. Sometimes it feels like fast food catharsis. Here, it feels like the inevitable endpoint of a relationship dynamic that was always about control. The betrayer's betrayal is framed as more than infidelity or greed. It's framed as a decision to treat vows like props. And the reason that's such a violent act in this story's moral universe is because vows, for her, are the language of trust. They are not decorative. They are architecture. She built her life around them. So when he breaks them, he's not just leaving, he's trying to collapse the building with her inside. That's why the comeback has to be architectural too. She doesn't just get revenge. She rebuilds a structure where she cannot be collapsed so easily again. And the drama makes you feel that rebuilding not as a montage of wins, but as a slow hardening. It's like watching a metal cool. The softness doesn't evaporate, but it becomes something that can cut. There's this particular emotional trick the drama pulls that I really admired. It makes you remember the romance at the exact moments you want to hate him the most. It will toss in a quiet echo of the earlier tenderness, like a sound or a familiar phrase or the way the camera used to cradle their faces, and it reminds you that the love was real. That's what makes the revenge complicated, and the complication is what gives the story its aftertaste. Because if he were pure evil from the first minute, you'd enjoy the downfall, sure, but you wouldn't feel the tragedy of what was wasted. Broken Vows wants you to feel the waste. It wants you to feel the ash. And here's a point I don't think enough people talk about with these dramas: revenge is only satisfying if the protagonist's pain is treated as legitimate. Not performative. Not something she can brush off once she's wearing sharper suits. This show keeps insisting that pain has a memory. So even when she's winning, you can sometimes see a flicker of the old wound. It doesn't undermine her. It humanizes her. It makes the goddess concept feel like an armor she wears, not a personality she swapped into. There's a mini-scene, late game, that I'm going to describe in a way that stays impressionistic. It's one of those face-to-face moments where the betrayer tries a final tactic, not intimidation, not charm, but nostalgia. He tries to summon the version of her that used to soften. He tries to speak to the woman who once believed his words were safe. And the camera, the editing, the sound, everything, sets it up like it could work. Like the room might become a memory. Like time might rewind. And for half a second, you see it on her face, the ghost of what was. Just a ghost. And then she kills it. Not with cruelty. With clarity. She answers him like someone answering a stranger who has the wrong number. The nostalgia collapses. The room becomes cold again. The music, if it even exists in that moment, feels distant. And his face does this thing, this micro-flinch, because he realizes he can't reach her anymore. That's when the begging starts becoming possible. Not because he suddenly feels remorse, but because he feels locked out. I want to linger on that distinction, because it's where the drama is smarter than it looks at first glance. The betrayer begging isn't necessarily an apology. In stories like this, begging is often just the last weapon of a man whose other weapons got confiscated. He begs the way he used to command. He begs as a continuation of entitlement. And Broken Vows, in the way it frames him, seems aware of that. It doesn't romanticize his desperation as love. It frames it as loss of control. That's also why the goddess's response, when she finally delivers it, feels like judgment rather than revenge for fun. The show doesn't ask you to swoon over him suffering. It asks you to recognize the symmetry. He weaponized vows. She weaponizes consequence. He made a public spectacle of her humiliation. The story makes a public spectacle of his unmasking. It's not that humiliation becomes morally pure. It's that it becomes narratively balanced. Now, I'm going to pivot into craft more deeply, because this is where I think newcomers will either fully fall in love with the show or at least respect what it's attempting. Broken Vows is not subtle about its themes, but it is consistent in its language. The visual palette, the sound design, the staging, the editing rhythm, they all revolve around one central idea: how power is performed and how power is withdrawn. Early on, her power is invisible. She has it, but she hides it behind warmth. She makes herself accessible. That accessibility is a performance too, even if it's sincere. It's the performance of, I'm safe to love. After the betrayal, she stops performing safety. She starts performing inevitability. That shift is communicated through colder lighting, sharper silhouettes, longer holds on her stillness, and more emphasis on space around her. The show literally gives her room to breathe when she gains power. That's one of those filmmaking choices that's so simple and so effective you almost don't notice it until you do, and then you can't unsee it. The production design is, in my opinion, one of the unsung heroes here. Because a story about wealth and status can easily become wallpaper. Ooh, fancy rooms. But Broken Vows uses those spaces as metaphors. The glossy rooms feel like stages. The glass walls feel like surveillance. The clean lines feel like control. And when she's humiliated, those spaces feel hostile, like the architecture itself is complicit in her exposure. Later, when she walks back into similar spaces with her power reasserted, the same architecture feels like it's working for her. She becomes the one who belongs. Everyone else becomes a guest in her atmosphere. Costuming, too, feels intentional in a way that supports character rather than distracting from it. It's not just, she looks good. It's, she looks deliberate. Her wardrobe becomes a kind of boundary. It says, don't touch. It says, don't assume. It's armor that also reads as taste. And that's important because taste, in these status worlds, is a language. The show understands that. It treats clothes not as decoration but as social signal. Editing is where I think the show takes a risk and mostly wins. The early pacing can feel slow if you're only chasing revenge dopamine. It sits in discomfort. It lets humiliation stretch. It makes you watch people be cruel in ways that are small enough to feel real and large enough to hurt. That's hard to sit through, and I can see why some viewers might be tempted to skip. But the show is building pressure. It's building the emotional justification for the scale of the comeback. If it rushed, the revenge would feel like it's happening to the wrong story. Once the comeback begins, the editing tightens. Cuts become more decisive. Scenes end on reactions rather than explanations. The show starts trusting you to connect dots, which is nice because a lot of melodramas are allergic to subtlety. Broken Vows is not subtle, but it is selective. It knows when to spell something out and when to let a look do the work. Sound design deserves another shout because the show uses public ambience like a character. Crowds, murmurs, the soft buzz of a room full of people who pretend they're not watching, those sounds make humiliation feel communal. Later, when she has the upper hand, those same public sounds feel like a choir. Like witnesses. The goddess isn't just fighting in private, she's issuing judgment in front of society. The sound reinforces that. The score itself, from what I picked up, plays with motifs in a way that mirrors her transformation. Themes that once felt romantic return in altered forms, sometimes slowed down, sometimes stripped of warmth, sometimes played with different instrumentation so they feel like echoes instead of comfort. That's a smart musical way to say, the past is still here, but it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's subtle enough that you might not consciously notice it, but you feel it. Now, I want to talk about the performances more, because the story's archetypal nature means acting is the thing that either makes it alive or makes it a cliché. The female lead's actor has a brutal job here. She has to carry devotion without seeming foolish, suffering without seeming passive, and revenge without seeming like she lost her humanity. That's a tightrope. And the reason I'm comfortable saying the show works emotionally is because she sells the internal continuity. You can believe it's the same person before and after the betrayal. The difference is not personality. The difference is boundaries. Her micro-expressions are the engine. The drama gives her moments where she's surrounded by people who want her to break, and you can see her calculating which emotion to reveal and which to swallow. You can see her choose dignity in real time. That's acting. That's not just writing. And those choices make the goddess persona feel earned rather than imposed. Now, I want to say something about the begging climax promised in the storyline, because a lot of dramas mess this up by making it too theatrical. They'll have the villain literally on his knees in a way that feels like pantomime. Broken Vows, at least in the way it's been building, seems more interested in emotional begging than physical. Begging as a posture. Begging as a voice. Begging as a loss of language. The betrayer, who used to speak in declarations, starts speaking in fragments. He starts bargaining. He starts pleading. He starts trying to rewrite the past. That's the begging that lands. The kind where you can hear pride choking. And the goddess's response is framed not as triumphant cruelty, but as inevitability. She doesn't need to enjoy it for it to be satisfying. The satisfaction comes from watching her not be moved. Watching her not be manipulated by tears. Watching her not be tempted by nostalgia. Watching her not be guilt into softness. She stays accurate. She stays clear. That clarity is the casting down. If you've ever been in a situation where someone who hurt you suddenly becomes emotional and expects you to comfort them, you know why that clarity is so cathartic. It's the fantasy of not being recruited back into the cycle. Another small human aside, there's a part of me that always wants the heroine to deliver one absolutely surgical line. Not a speech. Not a rant. One sentence that ends the conversation forever. And Broken Vows understands that desire. It feeds it. It gives you moments where she says less and it hurts more. I'm not going to quote anything because I'm not inventing exact lines, but the vibe is there. The show knows the power of brevity. The shorter the line, the sharper the blade. Now, let's talk about what doesn't work as well, because loving a drama doesn't mean pretending it's flawless. There are moments where the show leans into repetition in the middle stretch. Not repetition of plot exactly, but repetition of emotional beats. Another social humiliation. Another smug dismissal. Another accomplice sneering. Another moment of her being underestimated. It's effective the first few times. Then you start thinking, okay, we get it. The show usually compensates by escalating stakes or shifting context, but there are still stretches where you can feel the genre machinery. If you're binging, those stretches might blur. If you're watching more slowly, you might feel them more. It didn't ruin the experience for me because the payoff is strong, but it's worth noting. The show is patient to a fault sometimes. It wants to marinate in cruelty so you crave justice, but you might already be craving justice after the first marination. You don't always need the whole jar. Another potential weakness is that the hidden power element, depending on how you interpret it, can sometimes feel like an easy out. Like, oh, she was always rich and influential, so of course she wins. The show fights against that by emphasizing her strategy and emotional growth, but the fantasy is still there. If you're someone who dislikes any sense of, she wins because she's secretly untouchable, you might roll your eyes. Personally, I'm okay with it because the drama isn't pretending it's realism. It's mythic melodrama. The hidden power is part of the myth. But I will say, the drama works best when it focuses on psychological power rather than just material power. When it emphasizes her refusal, her boundary setting, her clarity, that's when it feels universally resonant. When it emphasizes money and status too heavily, it risks feeling like a billionaire fantasy rather than a human transformation. The good news is it keeps returning to the human. Now, the theme of vows is where the show really earns its emotional punch. Vows are intimate. They are the language of, I choose you even when it's hard. When those vows are broken for greed or status, it's not just betrayal, it's contempt. It's someone saying, your trust was convenient. That contempt is what makes the goddess's judgment feel deserved. And the show also critiques the idea that vows are automatically sacred just because they were spoken. It implies vows require maintenance. They require mutual respect. They require accountability. When the betrayer breaks them, he also breaks the moral claim he had on her loyalty. The goddess's revenge is, in a way, her revoking that claim. She's taking her loyalty back. There's something empowering in that idea. Loyalty is not a chain. It's a gift. If someone treats it like a chain, you take it back. The drama dramatizes that principle with maximal intensity. Now, I want to zoom in on one of the show's most satisfying craft decisions. It doesn't rush her into being emotionally over him. A lot of revenge stories make the heroine instantly uninterested, instantly cold, instantly above it all. That's fun, but it can also feel emotionally dishonest. Broken Vows lets her have conflicted moments. It lets her mourn. It lets her remember. It lets her feel, even as she acts. That makes the goddess persona more impressive because it's not numbness. It's discipline. Discipline is the show's secret theme, actually. Discipline of emotion. Discipline of action. Discipline of narrative control. The goddess is disciplined. The betrayer is impulsive and entitled. That contrast is what makes the downfall satisfying. It's not just good versus evil. It's discipline versus entitlement. And discipline wins. That's also why the show's pacing, when it's working, feels like a tightening screw. The goddess doesn't rush. She doesn't lash out randomly. She applies pressure. Pressure builds. Cracks appear. The betrayers scramble. Pressure builds again. It's structural. It's methodical. And as a viewer, you start to enjoy the method as much as the result. You start to savor the inevitability. Now, I want to address something that often gets overlooked in these stories. The aftermath of humiliation is not just sadness. It's rage, yes, but it's also a crisis of self-trust. You start doubting your own judgment. You start questioning whether your love was foolish. You start wondering if you're the kind of person who deserves betrayal because you let it happen. That's victim blaming internalized, and it's insidious. Broken Vows shows traces of that in her early suffering arc. You can feel her trying to locate the mistake inside herself. And then, crucially, the drama shifts that. It shows her realizing the mistake was not loving. The mistake was trusting someone who saw her love as leverage. That realization is the true awakening. Not "I'll get revenge," but "I will not be ashamed of my love." That's powerful. Because it means the betrayer doesn't get to poison her capacity for devotion. He only forces her to become discerning about where she gives it. Now, as the drama approaches its final confrontation, the tension becomes almost ritualistic. You can feel the narrative preparing an altar. The betrayer is being led toward it by his own arrogance. The goddess is walking toward it with calm. The witnesses, society, accomplices, opportunists, are gathering. The show's staging becomes more formal, more symmetrical, more, "this is a judgment scene." And I love that. I love when melodrama leans into ceremony. It makes the climax feel earned. And yes, when the moment comes where the betrayer is stripped of pride and status, it's satisfying in the way the storyline promises. Not because it's just humiliating, but because it's narratively clean. The show has been telling you from the beginning what he values, and it takes that value away. It's like watching a con artist get conned. The pleasure is in the symmetry. But here's where the drama also does something emotionally mature. It doesn't pretend that his begging fixes anything. Begging doesn't restore vows. Begging doesn't erase humiliation. Begging doesn't give her back the life she thought she had. It's too late. And the goddess's refusal to be moved by the begging is the true victory. Not because she's cruel, but because she's finally loyal to herself. That's the real vow she makes by the end, not a vow to love him, not a vow to save him, but a vow to never abandon herself again. And that's why the goddess metaphor feels earned. Gods, in myths, often the guardians of order. Her order is self-respect. Now, I want to talk about the emotional afterglow of the drama, because this is where my personal affection for it really solidified. After the big confrontations, after the downfall, there's an emotional quietness that settles in. The show doesn't treat that quietness as emptiness. It treats it as space. Space where she can finally hear herself think. Space where she's no longer reacting to betrayal. That space is the real prize. A lesser drama would end on the MIC drop and roll credits. Broken Vows, in its emotional texture, seems to understand that aftermath matters. That even in victory, there's grief. Even in justice, there's loss. That's honest. That's what made me sit back and feel something heavier than just satisfaction. Now, I'm going to pivot into recommendation territory soon, but before I do, I want to make sure I've said the thing I think is most important about this drama for newcomers. It is a revenge fantasy, yes, but it's also a story about not letting betrayal rewrite your relationship with yourself. The goddess doesn't just punish, she reclaims. And that reclamation is why the show is bingeable. Because even when the plot beats are familiar, the emotional experience feels personal. It feels like watching someone do what many of us wish we could do in some context: walk back into a room where we were disrespected and make the disrespect impossible. One more contrarian take, just to keep it real, I actually think some people will overpraise the badass goddess aspect and underappreciate the devotion aspect. And I get it, because revenge is flashy. But the devotion is what makes the story matter. If you watch this drama and only cheer when she's cold, you might miss the fact that her warmth wasn't a flaw. It was her humanity. The drama is not telling you to become cold. It's telling you to become clear. There's a difference. Warmth without boundaries is vulnerability to exploitation. Warmth with boundaries is power. That's the drama's lesson, and it's a better lesson than never love anyone. Now, if I were to grade the show purely on entertainment, it's high. It has tension. It has satisfaction. It has those moments that make you sit up. If I grade it on craft, it's also strong, consistent visual language, effective pacing shifts, performances that sell the emotional continuity. If I grade it on emotional honesty, it's surprisingly good for a melodrama. It doesn't cheapen her pain. It doesn't romanticize his betrayal. It doesn't turn revenge into pure candy. That said, you have to like this genre's intensity. If you prefer subtle relationship dramas where betrayal is handled through quiet conversations and internal reflection, this will feel like a thunderstorm. It's not trying to be subtle. It's trying to be cathartic. Now, here's my verdict, and yes, this is coming from someone who genuinely loved it. Broken Vows: The Goddess Casts You Down is one of those dramas that understands the primal appeal of revenge and then actually does the work to make that revenge feel emotionally justified and narratively satisfying. It doesn't just give you a powerful woman, it shows you the painful process of a devoted woman realizing her devotion was exploited and choosing to stop being available to people who treat love like leverage. The comeback is thrilling, the confrontations feel earned, and the goddess framing gives the story a mythic weight that makes the payoff hit harder than a typical betrayal to revenge pipeline. If you're a newcomer and you want a drama that will make you feel outrage and then give you catharsis without completely turning your brain off, this is a great entry point. If you've ever been the person who got underestimated because you were kind, this will hit you right in the chest. If you love watching reputation games, status games, and quiet power plays where a look does more damage than a scream, you're going to eat this up. If you should skip it, it's mainly if you can't handle extended humiliation arcs, or if you're allergic to heightened melodrama and symbolic framing. The show is not shy. It will lean into its title. It will make you sit in discomfort before it feeds you justice. And if that's not your thing, it's totally fine to pass and pick something gentler. If you watched it too, I want to know what your most satisfying moment was, and I'm not even asking for the biggest takedown. I'm asking for the moment where you felt her shift internally. The moment where you realized she was done. Drop it in the comments. And if you want more long-form drama reviews like this on Bongo Gaming, you already know what to do. I'll catch you in the next one, and until then, keep your vows sacred and your boundaries sharper than your enemies expect.